welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us at the second episode of our podcast. Just as in the first episode, we are continuing today the conversation with Mihai Balan, who was the head of energy systems here at EPG and the executive director of the Romanian Photovoltaic Industry Association. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Mihai. Always a pleasure. There's a lot to talk about renewables these days.
It's been a while since we've had a conversation like this. But as you mentioned, we're continuing our conversation on renewables. We discussed quite in depth the barriers that still exist in Romania and how it ranks compared to other EU countries. But I thought it would also be worth discussing something that is not part of the debate currently in Romania that much, which is public support. We're going to focus, as always, on a report. Today is going to be on a survey published by YouGov. It was published this year in 2022, but it's based on data collected in the autumn of 2021. And they show some quite interesting results about what Romanians think about renewable energy projects, especially in the vicinity. But we'll discuss these things in turn. Before we move to their actual figures and what's interesting in those findings, I thought I would ask you first, Mihai, especially from your experience with renewable associations, what's your take? What's the general public perception of renewable energy in Romania?
Well, Mihai, you can never talk enough about barriers when it comes to renewable developments, but luckily in Romania, public support is not one of them. Mm-hmm. And I think this summarizes well our discussion on this topic, because traditionally it's been more administrative barriers than public support that stood in the way of renewable developments in the last 10 to 15 years in Romania.
No, absolutely. I mean, there's this well-documented phenomenon of not in my backyard, NIMBYism, that's what it's called. And we've seen examples of that in the literature coming especially from the UK, from Germany in particular, from some areas of France. And in this YouGov survey, which analyzes the perceptions in the entirety of the EU, so it looks at all member states, there's some very interesting results. So I'm just going to read out some numbers. Citizens that have been asked whether they would support to live in the vicinity of a renewable project have overwhelmingly said that they would be willing to do so in Romania. So 82% said they would support living next to an onshore wind farm, compared to 62% in the rest of the EU. And 74% said they would be willing to live in the vicinity of an offshore wind farm, compared also to 62% in the rest of the EU. For solar power, the percentages are even better. It is 89% overall support for living next to PV parks, and 90% for having a rooftop panel on their own houses, compared to 73% and 81% support in the EU. So I think there's a couple of interesting things here that are worth discussing. So first of all, there seems to be a 20% larger support in Romania for living next to an onshore wind farm than in the rest of Europe. Why is that?
I think the figures are extraordinary, and it really shows an extraordinary support for the energy transition and clean energy technologies in Romania. It's quite overwhelming to actually read these figures and put them into context in what's the role of renewable energy in the current global challenge that we're facing in terms of energy prices and reducing dependence on fossil gas imports from unstable regions. It's actually interesting to see that there's at least a 20% difference in terms of public perception in favor of renewables compared to Western Europe. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but just to make a small joke, it seems that Romanians would welcome in their backyard some sort of renewable energy technologies, rather than other people from Europe which are more opposed to them.
But I guess, how does the general development of renewables look in Romania compared to other member states? Is it more concentrated? Is it more diffuse? I guess the fact that the population is quite sparse in terms of density also contributes to this.
That's exactly probably the main cause of the differences in perception let's take, for example, the wind energy resource in Romania. It's mostly concentrated in one or two areas, with most of the potential coming in Dobrogea, which has a low population density, and that's why people actually do not build wind farms in their backyards. They're probably built far away from their homes, and they don't see a lot of disadvantages in this. They just receive the advantages of putting their land to good use, both technically and economically, because it brings some revenue to them, and in terms of bringing clean and affordable electricity. On the other hand, the solar potential of Romania is rather well distributed across the country, of course, with a bit more potential in the south part. But the synergies between solar energy and dwellings are actually a lot easier to put in focus, and to actually bring advantages to the communities in which solar is developed.
So basically you see this sort of, still very high support that's also for both types of renewables, but as a matter of benefit, that people can perceive a bit more perhaps with the solar panels than they can with the windmills. But something that's interesting and is just curious to me. So in Europe, the overall support for living in the vicinity of a wind farm is the same for onshore and for offshore. There's no differentiation. In Romania, there's almost a 10 points difference, with offshore farms being less supported, which is curious, because the coastline of Romania is not necessarily that big. So why would more than a quarter of Romanians not want to live in the vicinity of an offshore wind farm?
It's maybe a problem of really understanding what an offshore farm involves, but as you were saying, the concentration on the coastline of Romania in terms of population and economic activities is not as high as in other parts of Europe, where offshore has seen a massive boom. And every development is different. So what happens in the Baltic Sea or in the North Sea will probably not happen in the same way in the Black Sea. And there's one key aspect that we have to take into account: how far away from the shore, how far away from the communities is the wind turbine, the offshore wind turbine, going to be placed? Because if it's like 5 kilometers away, it can always be visible. It can interact, with fishing activities, with trading activities, maritime activities. But if it's like 25, 30 kilometers farther than the shore, there's probably a minimum impact for the local communities, and this has to be well understood, by the local population in terms of advantages and both disadvantages before expressing their support or.
Yeah, but I mean that's also interesting, because so first of all, I think you're definitely correct, and I guess the good part is that. For those that are concerned about seeing offshore wind farms, as we've seen in our previous study at EPG, so the highest offshore wind potential is actually sort of the border between where you can build floating and non-floating offshore windmills. So it wouldn't necessarily be as much as a problem, at least at the beginning of these developments. And as time passes, obviously, people can get more accustomed, with what actually this is. But you mentioned, about how the communities are engaged, and what I think that the survey has shown across the board is that people tend to be, can be obvious, it's a bit spelling the obvious, but people support these sort of projects more if they create jobs, if the community is involved, and especially if the profits are shared with the community. Do you see something that's well perceived in Romania as well?
Absolutely, and I think it's key for every renewable energy development to take into account the three factors that you've mentioned. Job creation, local job creation is essential in obtaining public support. Bringing clean and affordable electricity to the local communities is also essential, and this is a main benefit of hosting renewable energy developments in your area. And last but not least, you have to take into account that renewable energy brings a lot more value to the communities compared to other types of energy. And during the first wave of renewable energy developments, we've seen some very good examples, some very positive examples in some parts, particularly in Dobrogea, where large wind farms were developed and the community benefited a lot from this. But there's still a lot of way to go. 10 or 15 years have passed, the industry has learned a lot in how to engage with the local communities, how to bring a lot more social and economic value. And you also need the cooperation of local and central authorities as well in trying to attract a lot more value today. And that's why we can also consider manufacturing. Well, it might not be in the community where the renewable energy potential will be exploited, but at least in the region or at national level. And this creates a lot more jobs than simply just installing and operating renewable capacities. So I think the industry and the local and central authorities must work together in the future in order to create some good practices and try to stick to them to the best use, in terms of creating this local value for the communities. And in this way, the figures that we're seeing today will probably remain at this level for the years to come. Because I must say, Romania is still in its infancy when it comes, to social and civil rights, and I don't expect that these figures will stay this high over the coming years naturally. So we're talking that we're not seeing NIMBY in Romania today. I think we will, and it's not really bad because it's also a signal for the industry to shift towards the right direction and bring as much value as possible to the community. So. And it also creates the premises, for good cooperation between the local population and the developers that come and stay in an area for the duration of their project, and this can be extended, in terms of duration.
Yeah, it's very interesting, because renewable capacity are more spread out generally than the very concentrated power plants, especially for fossil fuel power generation. And I guess it's great to see that there is no opposition right now. As you said, it might actually be good that people are more involved, and the solution to that obviously being to get them more properly involved as a community into developing the project, into maybe even profiting from it, besides just a sort of local value creation, especially for job creation that you mentioned. To me, as I read this, I wasn't too surprised, because in general, it seems that the overall level of support is high, especially for individual projects. I haven't seen any massive opposition to one yet. But as I was going through the results of the YouGov report, what became more peculiar to me was the very big difference between the support for renewables and the support for other types of power generation. And the reason for this is that, at least of the general feeling that you get from the media, is that there is a sort of almost national broad consensus about the role of coal, about the role of gas as a transition fuel, about the role of nuclear for providing energy into the future. But when you look at the figures, this is not necessarily so. And this is a sociological survey that has been conducted with a representative sample of all the Romanian population. We're not going to discuss here, obviously, the shortcomings of a survey, but the same data shows that only 29% of Romanians would support living next to a coal power plant, 24% next to an oil or gas power plant, and 20% next to a nuclear power plant. This is a huge difference. It's almost a 50% difference between support for renewables and for fossil fuel power plants and for nuclear. Do you find this surprising?
I find it extremely encouraging in terms of democracy as a whole in Romania, because it really shows that the population is probably the most progressive part of the Romanian state. And indeed, it's become obvious, that climate change is here. The effects, we're living them, we're dealing with them every day, and that they need to be, climate change needs to be mitigated quickly. And renewable energy is the main driver of this fight, the main instrument actually that we have in this fight. And it seems that the population understands this really, really well, and that it is ready, to take advantage from it. I mean, we've both, visited areas or lived in areas near coal power plants, and it's not nice. You can actually see the effects of pollution. And it's of no surprise, that the support levels are a lot lower, for traditional power generation technologies. And it's also because, people actually see a lot of potential, in renewable energy in terms of economic mobility. Everybody can now install solar PV on their rooftops. It is even encouraged by the European Union today. And it actually makes them active players in the energy market. You can produce your own electricity. If you have surplus, you give back. And it is good. It's engaging for the people. And it might not be really the same thing with wind. There's a lot... it's a totally different story, but at least with solar, it offers potential, for economic engagement with people and also social mobility, because these technologies also play a key role, in addressing energy poverty, which is only going to get worse in the next months or so, with the energy market prices.
Yeah, and especially after the capped prices will be no longer implemented. There's an awful situation that might unfold. To me, again, this is very striking because every survey that you see for the Romanian population shows a relatively evenly divided society. And this is definitely not the case here. Yeah? It's overwhelming support for renewable energy and not for fossil fuel power plants. To me, what's a bit more of a shame is that, as you said, the citizens understand and support this, but there's no political power that capitalizes on it right now. There is no mainstream party that has a very progressive stance when it comes to renewable energy and the energy transition as overall. And to me, that's just peculiar, which is how can you have such overwhelming support, especially compared to European counterparts, and yet no one is picking up this theme in a way in which it should.
We're actually delving here in a broader issue of the Romanian society and political system, in which unfortunately we must acknowledge that we're missing representation of the people. People don't feel represented by their politicians, and this is a key aspect, of the whole global fight against climate change, and it needs to change in a way, because people, should feel represented in aspects that are really essential to them. And what's more essential, than climate change, when, as we were saying, we're seeing the effects every day, and they're not only, in terms of temperatures that we're feeling, and they're also economical, and they're also, causing security issues, or will cause security issues over the next years. So representation should actually be instrumental in actually moving climate change fight in Romania, and not only, but yes, indeed, these people are not represented today. Of course, officially, we see the authorities supporting climate change. The fight against climate change, to be honest.
Well, when you look at some of the investment decisions in fossil fuels, you could say they support climate change. It's besides the point. I think that's very true, and I guess for me at least, I hope it's a matter of time until someone picks this up. Of course, this is not your regular issue against which someone can get rallied up, but it is something for which people feel positively about. Yeah, and it can also help sort of bring that sort of positive messaging into the political debate, rather than always being about being opposed to one thing or the other. Before we move on, I just wanted to delve onto...
excuse me for interrupting you, but I see a lot of potential here from some grassroots organization. If the people don't feel represented, maybe, they should get together, start getting organized, and advocate for what they feel is essential in their everyday life. And as the figures are showing, renewable energy and support for them is actually concerning a lot of people, and the response is overwhelmingly positive.
No, completely agree here. So before we move on, I just wanted to delve in a bit deeper on the figures we just discussed, because there's another thing that I think it's worth mentioning, which is that, as I mentioned before in the YouGov poll, people in Romania, on average, are more supportive of renewable energy than European people. And here, I must mention that these results are, we discussed about having a capacity installation in the immediate vicinity to one, but in the sort of overall public perception, the figures are almost the same. So when people are asked how do they feel the community, the society feels about these issues, the percentages are very similar. What's interesting is that As I said, support for coal at about 29%, for oil or gas power plants 24%, and nuclear 20%. This is higher still than the EU averages. So only 13% of European citizens support living next to a coal power plant, and 90% next to an oil or gas power plant. To me, this is another sort of layer that needs to be a bit unpacked, which is Romanians seem to be both more in favor of renewable energy, but also slightly more in favor of fossil fueled power plants.
I think it's clear that they're in favor of just about any economic activity that brings any sort of value to the area, and it's up, to the policymakers to explain them what brings, which technology brings more value, which technology brings more jobs, which technology harms them less in terms of emissions. But it's also important to see that this study was basically issued before what happened in Ukraine, and it's a tectonic shift, and in terms of public support, I don't think that natural gas or other technologies such as conventional energy generation technologies, which rely on external supply chains, are seeing that level of support today. I think their level of support has gone down because people finally realize they are a vulnerability as long as they're not, produced or based on internal resources. And I must say that probably the support for renewable energy would probably be even higher if the survey was remade today.
No, I agree. And I mean, another statistic I haven't mentioned, it's 90% of Romanians support more government intervention in favor of renewable energy. So even this figure, I imagine, is something, there is sort of like a collective consciousness that looks at and thinks that this is the way to go into the future. I just wanted to mention a bit more about some issues related to self-production and consumption of renewables, because there's also some interesting data here as well. So, for example, 85% of Romanians declare that they would be willing and interested in participating in an energy cooperative, compared to only 61% of Europeans. Interesting finding as well.
Interesting indeed, because we don't have a lot of examples for energy cooperatives in communities in Romania. And yes, this is the biggest untapped potential, distributed energy generation, rooftop PV, solar PV in small communities is something that hasn't really taken off in Romania for the moment, but there's some encouraging signals from both the national authorities and the EU with the most recent EU solar strategy, which sets clear mandates, for rooftop PV 2026, 2027, and 2029, and also clear mandates for energy communities. So I'm guessing that I'm actually pretty sure that we will see this sector booming over the next years in Romania. There's a lot of benefits for the local communities. There's a lot of benefits for individual dwellings, not only in terms of lowering their the cost with their electricity bills, but also in terms of adding actually more value to their properties. At the end of the day, let's not forget that their contribution will be essential, to the overall energy security of Romania, which actually creates better premises for the whole economy and society as a whole. So yes, these distributed energy generation and energy communities can bring a lot of value and should be encouraged, in a smart way by the government in Romania.
Yeah, so I guess these sort of statistics then are also related to the historical government inaction, because as you said, there's a thirst for anything that brings value in the energy field, and the closer it is to citizens, the more supportive they seem to be of it. You mentioned the mandates for rooftop PVs for new buildings. So before the war in Ukraine, this figure in Romania was at 70% support, very similar to the overall level of in the EU. But as you said, this will be crucial in coming years. We've seen how summers look now in Bucharest as well. It'll make an immense, it'll mean an immense advantage for meeting that peak demand. When the sun is hottest, when the air conditioners are at their highest. So this is surprising and encouraging to see.
And the Romanian legislation moved in the right direction. in the last several months with this, because now we have net metering, which
Mm-hmm.
is a huge support for the development of rooftop PV and distributed generation. And it opens up the possibility to actually integrate them with heat pumps, which would provide an efficient heating solution for Romanian dwellings that want to address the issue with gas today in terms of both availability and costs.
Yeah, and I mean, as you said, yeah, this is far more important right now when we've seen, like, I mean, from our personal experience, I'm sure as well, with like interest from the media, from friends, from everyone, which is like you were facing really high energy prices, and what can be done individually to do this. And yeah, I mean, my family as well, as you said, the net metering is a game changer for anyone who installs a rooftop PV, and it makes it make sense finally, which it didn't before. And the integration of the heat pump works fantastically. Yeah, so I think we can already be sort of optimistic of having identified a key solution for the energy crisis that we live in.
It's only, the first few steps on the road to electrification, because sooner rather than later, EVs will step in and they will be part of this ecosystem. So there's a lot of potential to be gained here, for the Romanian citizens, and they're feeling the moment. The figures show that they're feeling the moment and that they're very positive for change, a change that can bring a lot of opportunities. And compared to the official declarations and feeling that there's a lot of challenges with this. With this energy transition and the road towards net zero, it seems that they should be more encouraged by what the population feels. And it seems that the population actually is looking more at the opportunities that this creates. And it's truly an opportunity, to bridge the gap towards more advanced economies. Every transition brings this opportunity. You just have to seize it.
No, I think that sums up very well what we've basically been discussing, that, yeah, the public support is there for the energy transition and for renewable energy. The government and the authorities in general are still relatively lagging when it comes to actually implementing what it seems to be the general support and will of the Romanian citizens. Very interesting to see that, yeah, there's a general thirst for investments and for value added in the energy sector. And as you said, I think people are sensing the moment. And I'll finish the conversation just with one more statistic from the YouGov poll, which is that 80% of Romanians think that the government should do more to tackle climate change, which I guess expands a bit broader than the other discussion.
That's tremendous. I mean, putting this into the perspective of future election cycles, you should really understand that climate change is a big social aspect, and it will rally, a lot of political energy around this.
Okay, so thank you very much, Mihai Bulan, for being with us for the second episode of our podcast. It feels odd, yeah, we had two very positive podcasts. I'm sure we'll get to some more heated debates in the future as well, but thank you very much.
Absolutely, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.